Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle HISC Seerah session 195. And this is a collection of stories from during the sort of 20 or so days when they camped there, and also some of the things that happened on the way back. But we'll do a quick recap from last week, where the Prophet ﷺ is camped in Tabuk. And we talked about how the only person we know of who had the honor of leading the Prophet ﷺ in prayer, in a fard prayer, was Abdurrahman ibn Auf. And this was when the Prophet ﷺ was preparing for prayer Fajr time. The army led by Abdurrahman ibn Auf, they didn't wait for the Prophet ﷺ, and they started because they wanted to pray obviously on time. And then we went through one of the exquisite sermons of the Prophet ﷺ where he talks about the best and the worst of things, and then also, I'm not going to recap all of those, but also some of the 5 things that were exclusively granted to the Prophet ﷺ that were not granted to any other person before and obviously since then. And also talk about some of the prophecies that were given to the Prophet, like conquering Rome and the Roman and Persian empires. And we also said obviously that the Romans didn't turn up, and their Christian allies didn't turn up whilst the Prophet was camped in Tabuk. And so the Prophet used that time whilst he's camped there, obviously, to send a political and military message to the surrounding areas and tribes, flex his muscles, and expand the frontiers of the Muslim rule. And as part of that, entered into a lot of treaties with a lot of the neighboring or a lot of the Christian tribes and other tribes in that area at the time. And so they became either Muslim or allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ and to the Islamic State in Medina. And part of that is offering them to pay Jizya, which is sort of like a protection tax, as it were, if they switch allegiance to the Muslims. And then we also talked about how the Prophet dispatched Khalid bin Walid to Dawmat al-Jandal to capture their king, Uqaydir, who was out in the night time in the full moon hunting some animals, and then he was captured and brought back to the Prophet ﷺ, and he gave him lots of gifts. And the Prophet ﷺ, one of the gifts was a really fine, fancy, a robe. And the Prophet ﷺ said to the Sahabi who were sort of really wowed by the splendor of that robe, and he said, "Look, are you really surprised by this? The handkerchief or the tissues of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh in paradise are more resplendent than this piece of cloth here." And then we talked about how the Prophet ﷺ, demonstrated real leadership, where he is, quietly but personally, alongside Umar ibn al-Khattab and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, burying one of the Sahabi who passed away during the time there. And that again just shows how the Prophet personally took care of the Muslims in the army. So moving on now to some of the other sort of minor stories. Again, we're in the 9th year of the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, and we mentioned so many times that the army wasn't properly equipped. There were a lot of them, 20 to 30,000 of them, and this is known as the army of difficulty, Jaysh al-Usrah, for that reason. They're slaughtering their camels. They're drinking they're trying to squeeze out the water from these slaughtered camels from the humps. And they're eating leaves. And they're having a really tough time, and there's a shortage of water. And then one of the other sort of famous instances that we'll start off with before we get on to some of the miracles that happened during these sort of 40, 50 days is the Prophet sends another letter to Heraclius, because obviously they've come to the frontiers of the Muslim territory. They've actually expanded into territories that were previously governed and ruled by the Eastern Roman Empire. And so the Prophet is saying, look, basically we turned up. Where were you guys? You knew we were coming. And again, the Prophet is using this opportunity to flex him and his army and send a clear political message to Heraclius. And again, the audience is not just Heraclius. The audience is the people in their court, and obviously news will spread out. The Prophet, he turns up. The Heraclius doesn't show up for the fight, and then the Prophet is challenging Heraclius again, and so this is intended to send a message to lots of other people, around the Prophet's intentions. So this is a famous hadith where narrated by Sa'id ibn Abi Rashid, and he goes that he knows of this person who was the ambassador from Heraclius to the Prophet and so this man is really old now. He's nearly 100 years old or so, which is nearly or over twice the life expectancy of the Arabs of the time. So very old man, and this Tabi'in, he wants to know the story of this letter because he knows that this chap is nearby. Some say that this chap, chap Saeed, he went and met this person in a church. And to discuss what happened. So basically, he recounts that this person was really old, and he meets up with him and he says, "Please tell me the story of the letter that was sent to the Prophet ﷺ from Heraclius." So the person from the tribe of Tanukh, and he's given sort of the nickname that Tanukhi. He says, "Yeah, fine. I'll tell you the story." And he goes, that Tanukhi, he goes, the Prophet he came to Tabuk, and so he sent Dihyah al-Kalbi to Heraclius. And again, this is the second letter that is going to Heraclius. The first letter we talked about that was sent when Heraclius received that letter. And again, this was the batch of letters that was sent to all the kings and emperors, including Heraclius, including the Khosrows of Persia, Najashi, and inviting them to Islam. And so he's sending a follow-up letter to that through Dihyah al-Kalbi. And again, if we remember, the first letter was when Heraclius said, what's this letter about? Find me some Arab who knows about this man Muhammad, and that story where they found Abu Sufyan, who's on a trading trip near Gaza in Palestine, and then Abu Sufyan is sat in front of Heraclius, and his other entourage in the caravan are positioned behind him, so Abu Sufyan can't see, and Heraclius is directly in his court asking Abu Sufyan, who is this man? What are the signs of prophet? Or does he lie, etc., etc.? Who follows him? So it's that story. And so anyway, this Tanukh, he goes, when the messenger Dihyah al-Kalbi, he came to Heraclius. Heraclius, he he received the letter, and then he called all his senior advisors, all his priests, into the big hall. And then he asked the people to lock the doors of the hall. So basically, they're in the court, and all his top advisors, all the elite of government, they're all there. And Heraclius locks the door, and then he turns to them, and again you can sense there is a doubt in the mind of Heraclius, and his inclination is perhaps to try and follow the Prophet ﷺ, but he's not sure. And again, we saw that with the first letter as well. So he locks the door and he says to them, I've gathered you here. You know the status of this man and his affairs, referring to the Prophet ﷺ, and then how much he has conquered. We know the stories. We get the updates. We follow the news, the sort of the Twitter handles of the time, or the breaking news. They know what's happening with the Prophet ﷺ. It's no longer some obscure person. He's expanding territory. So they know that. And he goes, look, you guys know all of this. And now he sent me this other letter inviting me to one of three things. So the first letter was about inviting them to Islam, become a Muslim. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, he's stepping up a different gear, and he's challenging these people. And it's the same thing that he's saying to the other tribes in northern Arabia that he's conquering. And the three things are, and these are standard offers, for the Muslim army or the head of the Islamic State when they are expanding into new territories. Basically, either you become Muslim, either you follow the religion of Islam. So that is the premier option. Follow Islam. If you don't want to follow Islam, you can pay Jizya, this sort of a tax protection, and you keep your land. Okay, so we're not going to kick you off. We're not going to take over. You keep the land, but you have to pay this Jizya to the Muslims, to the head of state in Medina. If you reject that, then the Muslims can declare war and fight you. So there's a proper process that needs to go through. You invite them to Islam. If they refuse that, you invite them to pay Jizya and to recognize your authority. If not, then you can fight them. So Heraclius is saying, look, he's telling us in this letter, either we follow him, or we pay this Jizya, but we get to keep the land, or we fight him. There's a famous story of sort of a few generations later on. This is a sort of a side story where one of the Muslim territories in the sort of Central Asia area, I think, where the army, they conquered the territory, but they didn't give these three options. They just went in, they conquered the territory. Then the people started to learn about Islam, and then they came across this thing that actually you need to go through this proper process. You need to formally invite the people to Islam, either through dawah or through ambassadors, or you give them the offer of paying jizya, and then you fight them. But when this particular army went in, they didn't follow those steps. They just went in and conquered. And so then they went back to the leaders and said, you didn't follow your own rules. And so the leader says, okay, fine, it's a fair cop. And the whole Muslim army then withdrew and said, yeah, you're right. And then when the people saw the justice of that, they personally invited them back in to take over and rule over them. But anyway, that's a side issue. But there's this step process that needs to go. So Heraclius, he's got all the elite there, the powerful, the wealthy, the ministers, the people of government, and he goes, and the religious priests. He says, you know from what we read in our scriptures that he will eventually control what is under our feet. We know he's going to take over the land and territory, right? So why don't we follow him now and follow his religion? Or if you refuse, at least let's make peace with him and give him the money he's requested. So basically Heraclius is saying, look, we know he's a true prophet. And again, this was in the back of his mind, beforehand with the first letter. We know he's a true prophet. Why don't we follow him and then get all the benefits of that? But if you don't want to do that, let's at least, pay him this tax. And so there's, literally pandemonium in the court. The priests are freaking out. The wealthy and the powerful, they don't know what to say. They're all dumbfounded that their emperor, who is not just their military leader, but he's their religious leader. He has been appointed, in their eyes, he has been appointed by God to rule over them in the Christian faith. And he is saying, let's become Muslim. So there's, again, they're going to lose power. They're going to lose influence. They're going to lose everything, and for some of them, they will have had a Christian conviction that actually they do believe that Christianity is the right way, but they're just, literally freaking out. They're trying to, break down the doors and announce to everyone that Heraclius, he's gone mad, or he wants to become a Muslim, etc., etc. But the doors are obviously locked, and so they can't go out. And so when they realize that they can't go out, they turn around and they start closing in on Heraclius, and then basically, fired up and saying, what? Are you saying that you want us to give up Christianity and then to become servants of these Bedouins in Arabia, in Hijaz? What is this? So then Heraclius, he can see in their reaction that the depth of hatred towards Islam, or more likely the anxieties around changing religion. And so and then he calms them and says, calm down. This was only a test. I was only going to see how you guys reacted to this test and how firm you are in your belief. So again, he was looking for a way out, and he was looking for some support amongst the at least the priests or the religious people, but he didn't get anything. So then he said, okay, fine, I was only testing you. And so then he has to change his game plan. He says, fine, find me some Arab from locally who someone who can speak Arabic and can be a reliable messenger. And I want to send him a letter to this man, the Prophet ﷺ. And so the people in the court who were Arabic speakers, they brought this man, Tanukh, who's retelling this story, to Heraclius. And then Heraclius, he sits down with this person and says, basically, look, take this parchment, take this letter to this man, the Prophet ﷺ, and whatever you do, whatever discussion you have with this man, just remember three things from the conversation. Right? He's basically saying, look, whatever this man grills you on, or you talk through, you chit chat, all I want you to do is remember three things, okay? And then bring these three things back to me. All I want from the conversation is check that does this man, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, mention the letters that he wrote to me. Secondly, when he reads the letter I'm going to give you, see if he mentions anything to do with night or darkness. And the third thing, see if there is something on his back that causes you to be a bit distressed, right? And we know that's the seal of prophethood. So again, these are 3 signs that they have in their books about the true prophet. And again, these things that they're lost, either lost to antiquity for us, or the Vatican has locked these things up in their books, in the Vatican library, and that they're not sharing with the people. But Heraclius knows these things. The top priests of the time knew these things, and we know about this, the story of Salman al-Farsi, that there are these. These are some of the signs that these bishops and these really religious people knew at the time, that there are signs of the last prophet, right? But again, the evil amongst some of the Christian elite, they've covered up these signs. But Heraclius is saying, look, this is a personal mission I'm sending you on. I want to know whatever the Prophet says, just come back with these 3 signs I need to know, right? Does he mention the letters I wrote to him? Anything about night and day? And is there something on his back? So the Tanukh, he's, and again, the instruction is just remember these 3 things, because what he doesn't want to do, and again, this is part of the mission. When the Prophet ﷺ is saying these things, you don't want to be writing down these things in front of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Because it's giving the game away, right? So the Heraclius has told him, you must memorize these 3 things. And again, this is the emperor, and then you've got this sort of lowly trader who's been sent by the emperor on this secret mission. So Tanukh, he goes out that I came and I arrived in Tabuk, and the Prophet ﷺ was there, and then the Prophet ﷺ was sitting amongst his companions by the well of Tabuk. And again, there's nothing about the way the Prophet ﷺ dresses or his entourage that shows to an outsider, to a foreigner, this is the prophet, this is the leader. He's not in any fine garments, he's not being fanned down, he's not, he's just chilling with his people. And so this Tanukh, he goes and asks me, where's your leader? And it's an army camp, obviously, so he gets escorted through and says, where's your leader? And the Sahabi says, he's over there, sat over there. So the Prophet, so he says, I went over to him and I saw him sat down, and I sat down with him and gave him the letter from Heraclius. So, obviously he'll been introduced. This is a person who's come from Heraclius, etc., etc. Because you're not going to have somebody go straight to the head of state, the chief of army, just walking through like that. And so the Prophet says, fine, sit down with me. And so the Prophet so the Tanukh said, I went down and sat down, gave him the thingy. The Prophet said, put the letter aside. Right? Most of us would be, the first thing we would do, we would open the letter. What has the emperor said? Right? But the Prophet, he just sort of took the letter, put it down beside him. And the Prophet turned, and again, this is the beauty about the way the Prophet handles things. Turned to the person and said, where are you from? Okay, so he's building a rapport with him. And the Tanukh goes, well, I'm from the tribe of Tanukh. And he goes, well, Prophet says, well, why don't you embrace Islam? Why don't you become a Muslim? And that is the real point of things. So the person goes, and again, he's just sort of blindsided by this question. So he goes, so the Prophet says, oh, why don't you embrace Islam? It is the Hanafiya, it is the millah of your forefather Ibrahim. You're an Arab, right? You're an Arab. The way of the Arabs is to follow Ibrahim. Why don't you follow his path? And the Tanukh, again, he's just really, didn't expect that. He goes, like, I'm here as an ambassador of a nation, and my people already have a religion where we're Christians. So I'm not going to embrace another religion whilst I'm an ambassador. I'll go back and I'll think about it. Again, there is a logic to this. He's been sent on a mission. He doesn't want to do anything which could potentially compromise that mission. either in the eyes of his people or in the eyes of the emperor. If he becomes a Muslim there and then, that may diminish whatever his mission is when he goes back to Heraclius. So it's like, I don't want to, wear two hats. I don't want to compromise my mission. I'll think about it when I go back. So that was something he laughed and said, okay, fine, fair enough. And then he recited, you do not guide those whom you love, rather Allah guides those whom he pleases. Okay? And that was the process we taught to him. Look, basically, I tried. Okay? Invited you, you're not receptive to that. That's fine. That's up to you now. And so then the Prophet said, "O person of Tanukh, I wrote a letter to the Jizya of Persia, right? And then he ripped it up. So Allah will rip his kingdom apart, and we know that happened. I wrote a letter to the Najashi, and he ripped it apart. So Allah will tear his kingdom apart. And I wrote my letter to your companion Heraclius, but he kept it safe. So the people will continue to see his strength as long as there is good in the people." And again, we've talked about this before. And again, you might think, well, actually, when he wrote the first letter to Heraclius, he kept it and he became a Muslim. The Prophet, and this is a different Heraclius that the Prophet is referring to. So again, we may have mentioned this. Can't remember if I didn't mention it, but I think I may have done when the Muslims, after the Muslims came back, and because the Prophet, he did janazah on that Heraclius, and on that Najashi, the Negus of Abyssinia, and Najashi is a title, right? So the Najashi that the Prophet wrote the first letter to became a secret Muslim, but then he died, and he was the Najashi that who conducted the marriage of the Prophet with Salama. He was the Najashi that sent back the Muslims after when the Muslims were in Khaybar, and that's that Najashi. And again, we talked about how when he was when he was in charge, there was a coup attempt against him, and whilst there was a coup attempt against him, he protected the Muslims that were there and said, if things go against me, here's the name of a person and a ship, go straight to the port, catch a ship and go back, because if I lose this coup, then the people will come after you. But he didn't lose it there, and the people were safe. But he made precautions for the Muslims there. So he was pro-Islam. He was a secret Muslim, and the Prophet did janazah in absentia when he died. But when that Najashi died, amongst the children, there was a battle for who's going to take over. And so there was a sort of a civil war where different factions were trying to take the leadership after Najashi. And then the son who eventually did take over, the Prophet, again, he knows these things. He's politically aware. He follows the news. He watches the news every day. He follows the Twitter handle. He knows what's going on in the world. So he sent a separate letter to that Najashi who took over, who ripped that up. And so Allah will rip up his kingdom. And we know, again, this is just fantastical how these empires that have been there for hundreds of years, 600-700 years, the Persian Empire or longer, the Abyssinian Empire had been there for hundreds of years. The Eastern Roman Empire had been, governing northern Africa for centuries. And then within a generation, all of them gone, right? And again, this is how the process predicted. So this is the process. He says, that he ripped it up, and you kept it safe. So that was the first thing. So remember, the Heraclius, the emperor, tells this person, "You're my ambassador. Check, does he mention the letter he wrote to me?" Tick, he mentioned it. But because this Tanukh is so burdened by the fact, oh my gosh, the emperor has given me this specific mission. When he hears that, oh, the letter, he takes out a parchment that he has, takes out an arrow, and says, number 1, ticks the box. Okay, so he knows one of the signs, and he makes a mental note of that. And so he said, like, that was the first of the 3 signs. This is him telling the story. That was the first of the 3 signs. So I took out an arrow from my quiver and carved out on a parchment, not so I don't forget that point. So then the Tanukh says to the Prophet, are you going to read the letter? Who's going to read you the letter? And he knows that the Prophet can't read. So the Prophet he called Muawiyah and says, can you read this letter? And then in the letter, he's reading the letter. In the letter, there is a question. Again, it's in one of those trick questions where Heraclius is saying to the Prophet, and this is in the letter, you pretend to invite me to heaven that is as broad as the heavens and the earth. And if that's the case, where is hell? Right? See, again, this must be one of the trick questions that they've been told will differentiate a true prophet from a false prophet, right? So you're saying heaven is as big as the heavens and the earth. So where's hell going to be? And so the Prophet says, Subhanallah, right? When he hears that, where does the night go when the day comes, right? So he's answering the question with another question. But the second question that Heraclius said to him was, when he reads the letter of mine, see if he mentions anything to do with night or darkness. And this is it, and so he says that's the second thing. And he scribbles on his parchment, tick. That's the second thing which is mentioned. So then Prophet turns to him and says, look, you're an ambassador. You have a right over us. And if we had something to give you, we would give it to you right now. But you can see our situation. We're at war. We're camped here. I personally am in travel and I don't have anything to give to you. So it's etiquette. It's the political norms of the time that when you receive an ambassador, they give you a gift and you give them a gift. And that tradition we still see today. And again, with an ambassador, the tradition is he is protected. You don't harm him. You don't kill him. And again, this was one of the things that led to the original expedition where the Prophet ﷺ dispatched the army that had the 3 leaders. If so-and-so dies, so-and-so takes over. If they die, so-and-so, if they die, then the people will choose. That was in revenge for the fact that one of the Ghassanid kings had killed the ambassador of the Prophet ﷺ. Again, it's a complete no-no. So these are the norms, the political norms of the time. The Prophet said, look, I'm at war. I haven't got anything to give you. But if I did, I would give it to you. And then when the Prophet was saying that to the Tanukh, Uthman ibn Affan, he stands up and says, Ya Rasulullah, I have a gift. I'll give him something. He goes back, Uthman, from his bag, and he grabs a yellow garment, and he says, and he gifts that to the Prophet to gift to him. Again, so the person who is asking Tanukh, 50 years later to tell the story, says, who was that man? And Tanukh goes, that was Uthman ibn Affan. So then the Prophet, he stands up then and says, he says aloud, who amongst you will host this man? He's come traveling to us. Who's going to host him for the night? And then an Ansari says, I'll look after him for the night. So this man from Tanukh, he stayed with this Ansari for the night. And then the next day, he's packing his bags to go back home. And the Prophet ﷺ calls him and says, come here, O man from Tanukh. And so, this man, Tanukh, he rushes the Prophet ﷺ. And so the Prophet, he then, in the classic way, he turns around, lowers his shirt, and says, "Come here, have a look at my back, at what your master asked you to look at." And so the Tanukh went back, looked at the back, and saw the seal of prophethood. And we talked about this when the story of Salman al-Farsi. He saw this seal of prophethood between his shoulder blades, which is like a little sort of egg-shaped growth of non-typical coloured hair on the back of the Prophet. And so the Tanukh had all three signs, and then he went back and gave that to Heraclius. And again, we don't know the follow-up of that. Obviously, Heraclius will have got that, but again, he's seen the reaction of his people. But deep down inside, he knows that this is a true prophet. But again, it just goes to show that there are people in those days and now, even nowadays, that they know the truth, but they have too much to lose, right? In following Islam or following the correct Islam. They have their wealth, their power, their influence, their fame, and they would prefer to cling on to that than the truth. And even amongst the Muslims, the Muslim community, you have people who are in that position who know that following true Islam is a big sacrifice, and they will have to give up, their big cars, their big houses, their positions of power and influence, right? If they're following true Islam. But that becomes more dear to them in this life than the promise of Allah. So that's a real lesson that we need to take forward. So it's getting late. It's Maghrib time, so I'll probably finish there. I won't actually carry on. I was going to talk about some of the fiqh issues related to the Battle of Tabuk that the Prophet talks about, things about doing your wudu, about the prayer. We've talked about traveler's prayer. There's other things around water and dead animals, which we will talk about next week, and we'll talk, inshallah, about some of the miracles that happened in the Battle of Tabuk. Not just the miracles that the Prophet did, the mu'jiza, but also some of the karama, the sort of mini miracles that were given to some of the Sahabi, or there's one or two stories, some more prophecies, inshallah, we'll talk about next time, and things like that, inshallah. So we'll finish there. And then we'll talk next week about some of these miracles, but also some of the munafiqeen and their plotting against the Prophet ﷺ. And again, this sort of builds up the picture of the Prophet ﷺ returning to Makkah, and we'll pick up the story of some of the munafiqeen who are in Medina, pick up the story of some of the munafiqeen in Medina, and their anti-Islam propaganda. And again, there's a group of people who are in the army who are munafiqeen, who obviously get very disappointed that there's no spoils of war, and then they start, back-chatting against Prophet ﷺ, against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, we'll pick up that next week, inshallah. So we'll finish there, inshallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ جَزَاكَ اللَّهُ خَيْرًا. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum.